Hi, this is Tina Gilbertson with a quick note about the episode that you are about to listen to. In this episode, I talk about one reason why estranged adult children sometimes refuse or revoke grandparents' access to their children. And I want to make it clear that the reason I'm talking about in this episode is not the only reason that can happen. It is one, and it's common, but it's not true in every case. So, as with all episodes of this podcast, if I say something that doesn't seem to fit for your situation, consider that really it might not fit. And as they say in 12-step meetings, take what you like and leave the rest. All right, on with the episode. Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. Because I work with parents whose children are adults, grandchildren are very often a part of the estrangement picture. And it's one of the saddest, most difficult aspects of this problem. Because although it seems as though the involvement of innocent children might change how estrangement plays out between the adults and the family, that expectation is often not met. Grandparents who consult with me are often frustrated by their adult children's seeming not to care about the impact of family estrangement on their children. So I'd like to offer some observations from my work with parents of estranged adult children to help you make a little more sense of what's going on, and at the very least, to normalize your experience if you're not able to see your grandchildren during estrangement from their parents. First of all, you might be interested to know that there is a surprisingly wide range of contact that may be allowed with grandchildren during their parents' estrangement. Some grandparents have never even met their grandchildren. Others may have looked after them regularly in the past. Maybe the grandchildren even lived with them for a time. Some unwillingly estranged grandparents may still babysit occasionally, but maybe it's less frequent than it used to be, and the handoffs can be chilly. No matter what the details of your situation, being separated from grandchildren is a loss that for some is even greater than the loss of connection with their adult children. And in addition to a sense of loss, as if that isn't enough, you may also feel rejected, abandoned, invisible, and powerless. I've heard of grandparents being blindsided when they're suddenly disallowed to pick up grandchildren at school. Many grandparents find themselves no longer informed about events the children are participating in. The majority of grandparents I've spoken with have experienced sending gifts and having them either returned or go unacknowledged. They don't even know if their grandchildren even received them, let alone know where the gifts came from. Gifts are just one consideration for grandparents struggling to maintain ties with grandchildren, but gifts are a huge issue because when you can't be with your grandchildren, often gifts are the only connection you have to them. I'm an example of this. When I was growing up, my grandparents lived so far away that I didn't get to see them very often, but there were always gifts and cards from them for my birthday and other special days throughout the year. Receiving gifts and cards and letters from my grandparents made me feel connected to them in a way that I wouldn't have if I'd never seen or heard from them. So it's easy for me to understand why sending gifts and cards feels important, especially when you're at a physical or emotional distance. But this can become problematic. Bumping up against walls erected around grandchildren is not only alarming, but can also be embarrassing. You may not want to tell others what's going on, and so you start to feel isolated. And while you might acknowledge that your adult child or their spouse is unhappy with you at the moment, It's much harder for grandparents I speak with to understand why their adult children are allowing their own estrangement to affect not only the grandparents but the grandchildren as well. And here's one way to think about that. When times are good and there's harmony in the family, all the adults tend to be on the same page about protecting the children from adult-level problems. However, estrangement means that times are not good. And for many adult children, this changes the rules of engagement. Under the stress of estrangement from their parents, adult children are more likely to circle the wagons around their immediate family, including their children. Many do this to protect their children from the same kind of pain they've experienced in relation to their children's grandparents. So, while the grandparent sees the harm that's done by separation, adult children may be focused on the harm that could be done by being together. If it's incomprehensible how your adult child could be so cruel as to separate you from your grandchildren, that's because it only makes sense if you grasp that they're doing it for protection. Remember that no one has to be evil or cruel or intend harm for someone else to get hurt. Imagine someone grabbing a small child roughly by the arm and yanking her right off her feet. It's a horrible image, until you see the speeding car that would have hit the child had she not been yanked out of the way at the last minute. Roughly grabbing her arm and yanking it is brutal and could very well leave marks, but at least the child will be alive and safe. The possibility of harm is far from the thoughts of the grieving grandparent who simply misses his grandchildren and has no desire or intention to hurt anyone. For some grandparents, grandchildren provide the simple, uncomplicated relationship that they maybe missed with their own children the first time around. It's a second chance to enjoy and celebrate a new generation without the burdens of parenting. So from a grandparent's point of view, it's a beautiful and simple relationship that should be preserved at all costs. The idea of the cost being too high for the adult child in the middle can be hard to wrap your mind around, especially when you're so hurt yourself by what your adult child is doing. As in other types of relationship conflict, as long as both sides fail to understand where the other is coming from and why, progress toward reconciliation is slow or non-existent. Always assume that rather than being cruel or wanting to hurt you for some unfathomable reason, your adult child is a wounded person who's doing the best she can, and at the moment, estrangement is the best that she can do. She's not able to help you preserve your relationship with your grandchildren because she's coming at this with a totally different perspective. That's why I believe that in order to preserve relationships with grandchildren, most grandparents' best course of action is to try to repair the relationship between themselves and their own adult child and or their child's spouse, the grandchildren's other parent. I don't know of a more certain route to reconnecting with grandchildren than to cultivate the most positive relationship possible with their parents, preferably both parents. You want them to want their children to spend time with you for all the right reasons. Now, it may seem like this is impossible in your case. Your child and or his spouse might appear to be unreachable. And perhaps that's true. I hope not. I believe that most of us want the simple good things in life. We want to be loved and happy and enjoy our connections to others. And that includes being able to cherish both our parents and our children and to share them with each other. You may not be inclined yourself to keep trying to work on the relationship with your grandchildren's parents. It's too hard. They don't seem to want to cooperate. You feel attacked or ignored whenever you try to communicate with them. And maybe you're just tired. If that's the case, perhaps you can take a break for a little while. Get back in the game when you've had a chance to rest and recover your strength. It does take strength to repair estranged relationships. It may be one of the hardest things you ever do. But as difficult as it may be, understanding the reasons why people put distance between their parents and their children is essential if you want to close that distance. So the question I invite you to ask when you're ready is not, how can they do this to the grandchildren? But rather, why is this happening in my family? Until you have a sense of an answer to that question, why is this happening? You have virtually no hope of fixing this problem. But there is hope, because repairing relationships is something you can learn about if you're up for that. Not only are there lots of resources on the internet, but relationship repair is also the subject of this podcast and my book and most of the materials inside the Reconnection Club. You're not alone with this problem, and it's likely that you're not as powerless as you might sometimes feel. Knowledge is power, and these days, knowledge is available to everyone who seeks it. You don't have to leave the future of important relationships to chance. You deserve love, and your children and grandchildren deserve your love. So I hope you feel inspired to delve into the issues that led to this breach that's affected your family, in the spirit not of condemning anyone or passing judgment, but of healing relationships that apparently need healing. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.